Right, so get it. We're diving into hydroponics maize fodder today.
Hydroponics maize fodder.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's not just a science experiment or something. This is actually changing the game for dairy farmers over in India.
Yeah, what's interesting to me is how something as simple as growing plants without soil can have such a huge impact. We're talking about technology, sure, but also sustainability and economics and even animal welfare.
Yeah, totally. I
Yeah.
mean, just picture no soil, often these
Right.
vertical setups, and you've just got plants like thriving on this nutrient-rich water solution. I'm already thinking like sci-fi farms.
It's becoming less sci-fi every day, though, and there's this company, Shinya Agritech. They're really leading this whole movement, especially for dairy farming. They have this fodder as a service model that's pretty revolutionary, I think.
Fodder as a service? That sounds so modern.
Mm.
So before we get into all that, like how they're doing it, let's talk about why this even matters.
Yeah.
Why is hydroponics such a big deal, especially for dairy farmers in India?
Yeah. Well, you have to think about the context, right? India has this enormous dairy industry, but it's facing some serious challenges. Land is getting scarce, water is super precious, and those traditional methods of growing fodder, they're just not keeping up.
So it's like this perfect storm brewing. High demand for milk, but fewer and fewer resources to actually feed the cows making that milk.
Exactly. And that's exactly where hydroponics comes in. It tackles those issues head on. You need way less land. You can cut water usage drastically, like up to 95% sometimes, and the growth cycle is incredibly fast.
Less land, less water, faster growth.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm listening. That sounds pretty good.
Mm.
But what about the quality of this hydroponic fodder? Can it really compete with the traditional stuff, the soil-grown fodder, in terms of how nutritious it is?
That is the question, isn't it? And thankfully, there's some research to help us get some answers.
Mhm.
There was this study from the Indian Journal of Animal Sciences that looked at what happens when you feed hydroponic maize fodder, or HMF, to lactating cows.
Yeah. So we're talking about cows that are actively producing milk. The heart of the dairy industry, right?
Mm.
What did they find? Was this HMF good for the cows?
The results were actually really promising. They found that feeding HMF actually made the milk yield go up, it increased the fat content of the milk, and it even improved the feed conversion ratio.
Wait, so hold on. They got more milk, and it was higher in fat. That's like every dairy farmer's dream come true. But what about this feed conversion ratio thing? What does that actually mean for the farmer?
Think of it like this. You have two cars that both drive the same distance, but one uses a lot less fuel. Which one's better? Obviously the one that sips the fuel. It's the same idea with cows and feed. A better feed conversion ratio means they need less food to produce the same amount of milk.
Oh, so it's all about efficiency. Less feed equals more milk. That directly affects how much money the farmer makes.
Exactly. And that's why this research is so exciting. It's not just some cool idea floating around, it's a real solution with real benefits. Which brings us back to Shinya Agritech and how they're doing things.
Right, because they're not just growing this HMF. They're making it easy for farmers to get it in a totally new way. Let's break down this fodder as a service model. How does it actually work?
So instead of making farmers buy all this expensive hydroponic equipment, which a lot of them can't afford, Shinya takes care of everything. They do all the growing in these high-tech vertical farms. They call them Growth and Logistics Centers, or GLCs. They even use AI to pick the best grains, and they've got these sensors monitoring everything. It's really impressive.
So they're like this super tech-savvy farmer next door, but on a massive scale using all the latest gadgets. So what's the advantage for the farmers? What do they get out of using this service?
Well, basically, you get all the good stuff, the fresh, high-quality hydroponic fodder delivered right to your farm without having to pay for the equipment or deal with the hassle of setting up and running your own system.
So it's like having a personal chef for your cows. Only in this case, the chef is a high-tech hydroponics company. I
Yeah.
like it. That's pretty smart.
It is. And that's really just the start of how Shinya is changing things up for dairy farmers in India.
This is way more interesting than I thought hydroponics would be. I'm hooked.
It really is cool to see how something that seems simple can have such a big impact.
So we've talked about all the upsides, but every rose has its thorns, right? Are there any downsides or limits to this whole hydroponics thing? It can't be perfect, can it?
Well, you're right. No solution is perfect. And there are definitely some things to think about when it comes to scaling up hydroponics. But maybe it's better to talk about those after we get into more of what Shinya is doing and how they're trying to handle some of those potential issues.
Okay, fair enough. I'm definitely curious to hear more about what they're doing, especially beyond just growing the fodder. You mentioned they're building this whole support system for the farmers. What does that even look like?
Right, so they're not just dropping off the fodder and calling it a day. They're creating this network of support that goes way beyond just the plants. But I think that's a story for our next segment.
Okay, you've got me on the edge of my seat.
Hmm.
This is way more interesting than I ever thought hydroponics could be.
It's always amazing to see how these seemingly simple ideas can have such huge effects. And honestly, we're just getting started.
Well, I can't wait to dive in deeper.
Yeah.
So we know that hydroponics maize fodder, this HMF stuff, it's got some real potential. Less land, less water, grows super fast, and the research shows it's good for the cows. More milk, better efficiency. But now I'm curious about this ecosystem that Shunya Agritech is building. What does that actually look like?
It's like realizing that farmers need more than just the fodder. They need information resources and support to really succeed.
Yeah.
Shunya's not just giving them HMF, they're trying to help farmers build stronger and more sustainable businesses.
That sounds great, but what does that actually mean? What are they doing specifically?
Well, first off, they've got this app that connects farmers to a ton of information and resources. It's kind of like a one-stop shop for everything from animal care tips to market trends and even weather updates.
So it's like a social network, but just for dairy farmers. I can see how that would be really helpful, especially for farmers who are more isolated and maybe don't have access to that information easily.
Exactly. It breaks down those barriers and creates a sense of community, which is so important in agriculture. But it's not just about sharing information. Shunya also uses the app to connect farmers with things like microloans and insurance, which can be really hard for smaller farmers to get through the usual channels.
Wow, that's a big deal. We've all heard those stories about farmers struggling with debt and financial problems. Having access to those resources could really change things.
Definitely. And Shunya gets that healthy cows mean healthy profits. So they're also connecting farmers with vets and training programs on how to keep their animals healthy.
So it's a really well-rounded approach. They're looking out for the farmers, the cows, and even the environment by promoting sustainable practices.
It's all about understanding that everything's connected. You can't just focus on one piece of the puzzle and expect everything to work out. And that's what I think is impressive about Shunya's model. It takes all of that into account.
But even with all this support, aren't there still some challenges? It's a huge change in how fodder is produced and delivered. What kind of obstacles might Shunya run into as they try to grow?
You're right, there are definitely challenges. One of the big ones is infrastructure. Hydroponics needs a reliable supply of electricity and clean water, which can be tough in some rural areas.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And what about the cost? Even with the fodder as a service model, can smaller farmers really afford this HMF over time?
That's a good point. While the service model takes away the initial cost of setting up the hydroponic system, the ongoing cost of the fodder itself needs to be comparable to traditional fodder.
So it's about balancing the benefits of HMF, like the increased milk production and lower water use, with the cost of the service. Are there any other potential downsides or worries we should think about?
Well, another thing is education and awareness. Hydroponics is still pretty new for a lot of farmers, so it's important to build trust and show them how valuable it can be.
So it's not just about the technology and the infrastructure, it's about building relationships and teaching farmers about the benefits of this new system.
Yeah.
What about the impact on the environment? I know hydroponics uses less water, but are there any other environmental things to consider?
That's a great question, and it's something Shinya is working on. They're trying to make their operations even more sustainable by using renewable energy sources to power their farms and cutting down on waste.
It sounds like they're really dedicated to not just fixing one problem, but doing it in a way that's good for the environment and the communities in the long run.
Exactly. It's about seeing the big picture and understanding that sustainable solutions are about more than just making money. They're about creating a better future.
I'm really impressed with what Shunya's doing. They're not just selling something, they're building a movement. But let's get back to the research for a second. We talked about the good things HMF does for cows, but are there any potential downsides or risks we haven't mentioned?
That's a really important point and something researchers are still looking into. Some studies have suggested that a diet of only HMF might be missing some nutrients that are in traditional fodder. So it's crucial to make sure the cows are getting a balanced diet.
So it's not necessarily a perfect solution for everyone. There might be a need for extra supplements or careful monitoring to make sure the cows are getting everything they need.
Right. It's about understanding how this new approach works and using it in a way that maximizes the good stuff while minimizing any potential problems.
It seems like there's still a lot to learn, but the potential is definitely there.
Hmm.
I'm wondering, besides maize, are there any other types of fodder that Shunya is trying out with hydroponics?
That's a great question, and it actually leads us right into our next segment where we'll talk about the possibilities of using this model with other grains and maybe even changing how we think about animal feed.
Okay, you've got my attention.
Yeah, and get into it.
Okay, so we've talked about all the amazing benefits of this hydroponics maize fodder and how Shunya Agritech is making it possible for farmers in India to use it with that cool fodder as a service model and all that support they offer.
Mm.
You mentioned that they're not limiting themselves to just maize. What other grains are they looking at for hydroponic fodder?
The exciting thing is that Shinya is already running trials with barley and wheat to make fodder. It's like giving the cows a whole new menu with different nutrients depending on what they need.
A custom-designed menu for cows. I love that idea. So instead of just a basic salad, they can get a grain bowl with different toppings based on what each cow needs.
That's a great way to think about it. Different grains have different levels of things like protein and fiber. So farmers can work with Shunya to figure out the perfect fodder blend for their cows. It all depends on things like the breed of the cow, their age, what stage of milk production they're in, and even the season.
That makes sense. It gives the farmers more choices and more control, right? But isn't it also about making the whole system stronger? Like if there isn't enough maize one year, they can just switch to barley or wheat.
Exactly. Having a variety of options is key to being able to handle unexpected problems, especially with climate change affecting how much we can grow. By having multiple ways to produce fodder, farmers are less likely to be affected by changes in the market or problems with the supply chain.
So it's like having a backup plan for your backup plan. It also lets Shunya be more flexible to adapt to changes and meet the needs of farmers as things evolve.
Absolutely. It's all about building a system that's strong and adaptable. But there's another side to this diversification that I find really interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Think about what it could mean for biodiversity. By encouraging the growth of a wider range of grains, even if it's just for animal feed, we're helping to create a more diverse and healthier agricultural ecosystem.
So it's not just about helping the cows or the farmers, it's about helping the whole environment.
That's really cool.
It all comes back to that interconnectedness, right? It shows how something like this can have positive effects that reach far beyond the people directly involved.
This whole topic has been full of surprises. We started with a simple idea, growing maize fodder without soil, and look where it's taken us.
It just shows you what people can do when they put their minds to solving real problems and making a difference. I agree. I feel like we've just scratched the surface of this whole topic. There's so much more to learn. But I think we've given our listeners a pretty good idea of what hydroponics maize fodder is, how Shunya Agritech is making it a reality for farmers in India, and what kind of potential it has for the future.
Definitely. And hopefully it's made some people curious to learn more.
If you're interested in finding out more, we'll be sure to put some links in the show notes where you can learn about hydroponics, Shunya Agritech, and all the research we talked about.
And as always, we encourage you to keep exploring, asking questions, and learning. The more we understand about the world, the better we'll be able to create a more sustainable and successful future for everyone.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of hydroponics maize fodder. It's been an incredible journey.